Hello everyone, happy Friday afternoon. Welcome to another edition of hashtag Ask Robco. Hope you're all well, hope you're surviving in lockdown 2.0 and that all your families are healthy, safe and well. I'm super excited for our special guest today, Steve McNicholas. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Super quick intro before I give Steve the floor. Motivational speaker, leadership coach, mentor, one of the most renowned in the UK. And today we're going to share some insight on his journey, his outlook on life, what he's trying to achieve, and give, as always, on a Friday, bit of happiness, a bit of positivity, a bit of motivation, education and inspiration to set you all off in the world in a good way for the weekend. So welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining us and tell us about yourself.
Pleasure, Rob. Well, talk about sort of setting some context there in terms of motivating and inspiring, and I shall do my best. And great to see everybody and meet everybody on the call this afternoon or whenever you get time to watch it. So I've been on this planet, Rob, exactly today. It's my birthday today. So what a wonderful sort of birthday present is to get invited to speak to you today on Ask Robco.
Happy birthday. Thank you for giving up 30 minutes of your birthday to share with the world. That's amazing.
Don't be daft. It's better than eating birthday cake. It's not particularly good for middle-aged spread.
1 minute in, that also shows us kind of guy we're speaking to that would give up 30 minutes of his birthday to share his knowledge and wisdom. That's amazing. Love that, Steve. Happy birthday.
My pleasure. As hopefully we'll see through the course of this call, Rob, I have a passion for trying to help and inspire and inform anybody and everybody that I get the chance to do so, and I hope to do that over the course of this call today. So my journey, as you sort of said a second or two ago. So yes, I've been on this planet for 5 decades and a year now. I know I don't look that old, but unfortunately, according to the birth certificates, I am. Born and bred in my home city of Liverpool, where my family, sort of my parents and lots of my friends still live. I sort of moved a little bit north, and I'll explain that later, about 20 years ago. But great city, love the city, a lovely part. I mean, a tough place to grow up in the 70s and 80s. You know, Liverpool isn't the city, the vibrancy that it is now, but, you know, my parents tried their very best. They sort of tried to guide us, but you know, it was, I make no bones about it, a tough city in the 70s and the 80s. People may recall there were riots at the times in Toxteth, a suburb of the city where we lived. So we were right there when it all sort of kicked off, if you pardon the expression. However, you know, sort of mum and dad worked hard, tried to keep us on the straight and narrow. And at 11 years of age, Rob, I was very lucky to be invited to a grammar school, which for those of you guys listening today might not think what that is. You had to pass an exam, an educational exam at the age of 11. And if you were very lucky, and dare I even say it had an ounce of intelligence, then you may get a place at one of the city's top schools. And at 11 years of age, that happened to me. So, you know, parents were very proud. I was very proud. I was going to be the one that would go on and probably be the first member of the family to go to university. But as we're about to sort of hear, from that moment on, things got a little bit rocky, and sort of success, the success I talk about now and the success I've since experienced was a little bit away at that point. So off I toddled to grammar school with the posh blazer and the satchel and the pencils in the top pocket, thinking this is it, academic success is about to follow. But I think it'd be fair to say the next 5 or 6 years of study were non-existent. I was obsessed by sport, started getting interested in girls and things like that, and always kept saying to my teachers and my parents, right, I'll start studying next term, or I'll start studying next year. But 5 or 6 years whizzed by in a flash. Suddenly it was O-level time, which is the equivalent of GCSEs for students nowadays. And literally over 3 or 4 days, the rest of my life was pretty much, in terms of what it was going to be, my future was hanging by a thread, because I hadn't studied, and suddenly I was sat in a room sort of being examined and tested to earn qualifications or not that was considered how you would shape the rest of your life. And frankly, I bombed, Rob. I make no bones about it. I could use worse language, but it really was a disaster. And as you're about to hear, the next 4 decades of my life, from that point onwards to where we are now, has been influenced and shaped by 3 brown envelopes. 3 envelopes, the colour brown, have made a fundamental impact on my life, my career, my success, and everything else that goes with it. And the first of those brown envelopes arrived on about my 16th birthday, and they were the results of those exams that I've just talked about there.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. So let us know what bombing really is and explain to us those results. If you were going there anyway, great. What's inside that first envelope?
That brown envelope, Rob, was sort of handed to me by the school secretary, and all the other students were around, and it contained a little white slip. And in that white slip, it had all the subjects that we studied at school, and next to them was a letter or a grade, which was to sort of reflect how you had done on that particular exam. Now, clearly, most students were looking for A's, B's, and C's, which would indicate very good passes. My letters read as follows, Rob. U, which was ungradable. My score was so bad they couldn't give it a grade. U. I got an E, and then I got a D, and I thought, success is about to follow. Quickly followed by 2 more U's, and then a B in mathematics, which just happened to be one of my core strengths. So
wait, B in maths. What were the E and D's?
I think I got an E in physics and a D in chemistry, but English and English literature and geography and history and religious and pretty much all the rest of the educational subjects were ungradable. My grades were so bad, Rob, that I couldn't even resit. The school wouldn't have allowed me to resit them. I was deemed too bad academically, which is what I meant by the word bombed earlier. Literally was an absolute disaster. By far the lowest graded pupil in the school. And literally, I was just shown the door. You know, I hadn't qualified enough to resit them. I certainly hadn't qualified them enough to go into 6th form and do A levels. So there was the door in a city where youth unemployment at the time was approaching 40%. So 4 out of every 10 teenagers searching for unemployment, 4 out of any 10 teenagers had no employment. None.
Steve, I'm gonna rudely interrupt there because I've got to share with you. I went on a similar journey to you, and I come from a low to medium social background. My parents, 2nd generation immigrants. No one had ever studied. We didn't have any money. I would have been doing paper rounds, washing cars, cutting lawns from the age of 7, 8, 9. So really grafting from a young age because there was no alternative. My parents explained that to me. At the age of 11, like you, I managed to get the opportunity to go to a proper school, and the main reason was because I was good at sports, and they, you know, wanted to get me in because of the sport, even though my grades were so. It was really the sport thing. And at that point, the pressure on me to go to that school, and like your parents, my parents were working ridiculously hard to look after the family anyway. I understood that if I went to that school, it would cost them even more money. And I couldn't, at that age, live with the guilt and the responsibility of making my parents get more jobs just to do that. So I never went to the school. I went to something that was free and independent or straightforward because I didn't want that pressure on me, because I didn't want to be in the position 5 years down the line where I had the conversation, I've bombed in my grades because I knew what I was like, and I didn't want that guiltiness of having wasted the opportunity they've given me. So you know where I'm going next?
Totally.
What happens when you speak to your parents?
Well, that was the moment where I think that, you know, I talk about the 3 brown envelopes, Rob, and this is the first one. And there are 2 more in the journey that play a fundamental part. But this first one was that bus journey home from school with that envelope. I make no bones about it. I thought long and hard about, could I go and doctor the grades? Could I change them? Could I sort of do something to sort of minimize the damage, or do I just face up? Do I just realize that, you know, this is the result of my lack of effort over 5.5 years? I had a wonderful opportunity and I'd pretty much blown it, so now I had to face up. And Rob, when I presented those grades to mum and dad, the look of disappointment in their eyes that morning will stay with me forever. The look of disappointment, regret, frustration, anger, that I had had this wonderful opportunity, and despite countless promises over the previous 5 years of I'll start studying next year, I'll start studying next term, I'd let them down. And that look of disappointment in their eyes, particularly mums, was the catalyst on the back of that first brown envelope for the next, arguably the next 20 odd years of career and professional success. And what fundamentally happened from that moment is, and I'll start to talk about some of the things in my books in a second or two, the success code, the methodology that ultimately I write about and I speak about now. But I took ownership for my life at that point. I took ownership for getting a job, for bringing some income in, for giving mum and dad some money every week to pay for the bills and the food and etc. and my upkeep. And for the next 22 years, Rob, I'm going to quickly whiz through 22 years. Feel free to interject. But I progressed from an office junior, my first job on £25 a week, to 21, 22 years later, I was a managing director in a global bank with 2,500 people working for me or working under me, and I had all the trappings and all the success that you would imagine goes with an executive role in a financial services organization that spanned the world. And this was the boy that had no qualifications, as we heard, bombed at school. Hopefully everybody knows what bombed means now. And yet from that moment of disappointment in mum's eyes and dad's eyes, I didn't know then at the time, but the success code kicked in. I had no idea what it was, but I took ownership. I set some goals. I took accountability. I took action. I got those beliefs out of my mind of I'll do it next week, I'll do it next year, I'll do it next month. And I started to concentrate on today and today alone. And it would be fair to say the next 22 years was just a continuous story of success. Don't get me wrong, plenty of bumps and bruises and plenty of things I got wrong over those 2.5 decades. But ultimately, as I approached my 40th birthday, I was the managing director for, you know, an international bank. And literally had the trappings, the car, the house, the holidays, the home, etc., that one would imagine. So you could say at that point, I had been successful from a point of, you know, despair and being in the pits of where do I go now, to a point of I've cracked it. But just at the moment when you think you've cracked it, the second brown envelope that I've referred to landed in my hands. And at this particular point, we're at 2008, 2009. And people may remember there was a global financial crisis. The banks imploded. Now, I just happened to be a senior executive of one of those banks, so I think you can guess where this is going. So the second brown envelope was handed to me in 2009, and in it was a redundancy notice. So I'd spent the previous 12 months making hundreds and hundreds of people redundant, unfortunately, not the most enjoyable year of my career, but suddenly it was my turn. And I had 2 babies at home and my wife, who decided to step away from work to look after our babies. We had mortgage, we had debts, we had car loans, we had credit card balances. And suddenly this cash machine that was me had no job. My experience was in an industry that had imploded. I had no opportunities to get new employment in banking or financial services. I mean, who was going to pay me £200,000 a year at the point when banks were shutting doors and banks were going bust? It just wasn't going to happen. But that was the second brown envelope, Rob, and it immediately took me back to that moment when I saw mum's eyes, when I had to look at Caroline's eyes as she held our babies and said, I don't have a job. I don't know how I'm going to bring money in. I don't know how I'm going to pay the mortgage. I'm sure you can imagine the emotion and the fear that we both had at that point was overwhelming. It was a difficult few weeks, few months in our lives. And the second brown envelope was that catalyst. It was the redundancy notice. And the dreams and the goals and the home and the holidays and all the plans and what we're going to do with the children and how we're going to fund their education was all at risk because of this second brown envelope. You know, I think back about the first one and my reaction at that point. Well, I was disappointed, as you can imagine, a little bit worried for a few weeks. Yes, you know, unemployment across the world was skyrocketing. But again, this thing kicked in. This success code, this inner drive, this passion to actually overcome adversity. Once I got past the blame and the regret and the why me, which didn't last too long, thankfully, I decided once again to take accountability, to take ownership, to absolutely set some systemized goals in terms of what's coming next. And I'm very, very pleased to say that the next chapter was, you know, 8 or 9 years in successful private equity. I wrote 2 books. I got to study at Harvard. This is the guy again that got no educational qualifications, was suddenly studying at Harvard, writing 2 best-selling books and doing very, very well in the private equity industry. And ultimately, you know, again, the catalyst for that was that look of disappointment, was that brown envelope that arrived to say I had no job. The third brown envelope to close the story was an envelope that was given to me 2.5 years ago. We just sold the organization that I was running. We just sold it for $1 billion to a big US international corporate. And that was the third brown envelope, was the chance for me to go and do my own thing, to go and speak and travel internationally, speak about the success code, fundamentally then move into leadership coaching and work with teams and organizations internationally. And that's where we are, Rob. That's the 3 brown envelopes that categorize my journey from, you know, school and the episodes we've talked about there, from some of the toughest suburbs in Liverpool, of which I'm very proud of, by the way, a background, to the point where I'm at now, a successful business, traveling and speaking and working with some amazing organizations, helping them replicate some of the ideas and some of the methodologies that the success code is. Does that make sense?
I mean, Steve, what a story. I mean, you've given it to us so quickly, and obviously the micro shortened version. You know, to resonate with your journey is, I suppose, difficult for the ones that haven't been through it yet. What I can share, and it's something I share with the team here, is that I'm in my 27th year in business, and a very similar journey to you in that sense, not as successful, to be ridiculously fair on you, but the pain points I can absolutely recognize. And to put them into perspective, if we looked at the early 90s crash when I actually started working, and 08, 09, which I was working with banks as well at the same time, so I absolutely understand where you were at, to maybe Brexit, and then bringing in the pandemic now. The one thing you learn about experiencing those things is that your body and your mind go into autopilot, into this different level of existence that means you perform in a different way to what you've been doing throughout all those years. And it's that something within you that ignites, that sparks, that drives, and that changes everything, that then enables that next 10 to 12 years of your career and your life to develop. When you recognize within yourself that that's what happens in those moments, even when they happen and the whole world implodes, and you realize and you say, I've been here before, and what did I do last time? How did I behave? All it is pattern recognition. And all it is understanding the trend of how you behave in such circumstance. And that, without me knowing the success code, and without me understanding that part of your journey and story, which you can probably go into a bit more detail, I know from my own experience, and I share it with everyone, when you have to behave differently, you've got to look within, understand that now's not the time to do what you were doing to get you where you are. It's to flip everything around and interact, engage, and work in a way that's going to get you out of this position. What are your thoughts on all of that, Steve?
Rob, totally. And your viewers, your listeners today will be thinking that the brown envelope analogy, where's this going? Well, I use the brown envelope analogy, Rob, because we all have them in our lives. I've just talked about 3 that happened to me at 3 momentous moments. But no matter what age we all are, or what experience, or where we all are in our career or our lives today, we can all recognize those moments, those brown envelope moments, when things go wrong, when the best laid plans fall apart, when you get bad news, when you sort of are put into a difficult situation, when you realize that what you hope to happen is not going to happen. That is your brown envelope moment, and you're going to have many of them in your life. It's just a certainty, like death and taxes. We all have our brown envelope moments. Some of them are so subtle we don't even realize them. Some of them are so obvious, like unemployment and no education. I mean, they're really, really staggeringly obvious. But for whatever moments they are, it's how you react in those moments that determine the success, the achievement, the fulfillment, the happiness, the results, whatever way we want to measure this thing called success by. It is exactly how you react in those particular moments when you recognize them. That's the difference. That's the absolute categoric difference to those that we deem to be succeeding and achieving and winning, to those that are full of regret, remorse, and wishing. Now, what I didn't mention earlier, Rob, is that through the private equity part of my career, the last sort of phase of employment before I moved to work for myself, I had the wonderful opportunity to follow up on my passion about success. I knew, how could the guy that, didn't do so good at school in one of the toughest suburbs go on and achieve what I did in banking? Then how could the guy that was made unemployed in a banking crisis go on and study at Harvard and write 2 best-selling books? Well, one of the things that fueled that interest in those questions was I started to reach out and ask other successful people around the world. And because of the private equity world, it was global. Now, these could be individuals, they could be teams. It didn't matter what age they were or what sector they worked in. It didn't matter what sex they were. It didn't matter what education levels they had. If they had PhDs to somebody like me with no educational qualifications. And I started to ask these people, probably 750, 800 interviews over 7 or 8 years, how do you succeed? And what do you do to succeed? And I started to notice a pattern, Rob. There was a sequence. They might have called things differently. They might have had different labels to what we might use now. But ultimately, it was the same thing. It was a sequence of, not events, a sequence of strategies or methodologies or ways of thinking that suddenly, when I started to join the dots up, which is where the success code analogy came from, it's like a sequence of steps, a code, a source code of success. Now, you can define success in lots of different ways. It could be financially, it could be physically, it could be emotionally, it could be all of them, professionally, personally. Anything that is important to you could be measured by the word success. But they all started to say the same thing, Rob. And that's when it started to resonate with me. Well, actually, the reason I achieved what I did from school was because I did that. I didn't know at the time, but having now researched it and studied it and written about it and speak about it, I started to realize that's what drove me to succeed. That's what drove you to achieve what you did, Rob. Bearing in mind how you've sort of explained sort of your educational sort of challenges at the time. And I think it'd be fair to say you've gone on to achieve some amazing things, including these things on a front. Whether you recognize it or not, the success code is alive in you. And it starts with, taking ownership. And then it starts with finding a purpose and a passion that drives you. And then it starts with goals and systemizing those goals and overcoming limiting beliefs and taking action and so on and so on. There are 7 steps in the sequence anyway, but I won't bore everybody with the success code in that much detail. But that's what I wanted to share, that no matter who I spoke to globally, no matter what background they came from, be that an individual, be that a team, be that a business, when I said, how do you succeed? What do you do to succeed? They all, without a shadow of a doubt, they all eventually started to tell me the same thing. And fundamentally, when you apply that in the tough moments in your life, be that the brown envelope analogies that I've talked about, or whatever tough situations anybody watching today is facing, there is a way to rise above it, There is a way to get past it, and there is a way to propel yourself to some incredible, amazing successes in your life. And it's exactly what we're talking about now.
Love, I mean, absolutely love that. Really, absolutely amazing. Are we going to be allowed to take a few more minutes of your birthday, Steve? Because I've got loads of questions coming through, and I just want to make one more comment on what you've just said, and then we're going to go to some questions. Going back to the journey that I've been through and trying to pull it together with the code that you're talking about, the one thing that I realized that I didn't want to be responsible to other people, and I didn't want that guilt. And when everything went wrong, I wanted it to go wrong because of me. So I didn't want to blame the world or economics or politics or any situation. I wanted to be comfortable that if things went wrong, it was my fault, because then I wouldn't be letting anyone else down apart from myself. And I was comfortable with the failure within myself because I trusted and believed in myself enough to get up again and work through it. What I didn't want to do was bring other people down with me or put something in me, because I didn't want the guilt of that happening. And so from a young age, I wanted to own my wins and own my losses. And I was super comfortable owning my losses. And I still am today. If I make a decision today and it goes wrong and it's my fault, great. At least I made the decision that went wrong. If I do something today because you tell me to do it, I don't even know what you're telling me to do, and it goes wrong, how can I not want to blame you when I've just done what you told me to do? I'd much rather own that and learn through the process and understand and build a strength in decision making to trust myself so that I can grow and develop, etc., etc. I'm sure somewhere in the code that fits in, and we can talk about.
You don't, again, I'm not just saying this because you very kindly invited me on, but you know, I'll quickly summarize 7 or 8 years of research. I've sort of come to the conclusion that there's about 5.5 to 6% of the population think like that, and about do the maths. And I know I got a B in maths, I think 94%-ish of others don't. And it's such a subtle but obvious difference, as you've just said, which is, I think, what I'd like to think I do most of the time. Whatever happens, I'm going to own it. And it's not about blaming or regretting, or it's their fault, or it's the weather's fault, or it's the teacher's fault at school. You know, for a while, I wanted to blame the teachers. It was their fault I didn't have any educational qualifications. I mean, that's complete nonsense. They were there every day to try and teach me. I chose to not. And then to try and kid myself and say it was their fault, or blame them, or blame the parents, or blame the school, or blame the buses that took me to the school. Complete nonsense. When you take ownership for everything and anything that you want to achieve, like you've just said you did, then amazing things can happen, because then it's only down to one person, you. And it's not about everybody else and what everybody else thinks. It's about you. And again, that's, you know, that's one of the most common things. It's the first step of the success code. Success acronym starts with ownership. Nothing that you can do successfully, personally or professionally, can be achieved until you take complete ownership for your results, for your weight, for your health, for your bank balance, or whatever way we want to measure it. It starts with ownership. And that's what you just very passionately and eloquently explained, Rob.
Brilliant. Love that, Steve. Right, let's get through these questions. Otherwise, I feel we're letting everyone down and they all want a piece of you. Happy birthday, Steve. So that's an easy one to deal with. Just bought your book. From my mum. Just bought your book. Thank you so much. Great information and amazing story. That's nice and easy. Stephen, do you feel education is really not the right direction for some people? Do we need to spread our wings in different environments?
Well, it's a great question. And as a father of 2 young children, well, teenagers now, both of them, Molly and Daniel, I'm passionate about their education. One of the charity things that I take an interest in is I sit on a governing board for a local education authority, because I think my educational lack of was entirely down to me, as I've just sort of talked about over the last 30, 40 minutes or so. So ensuring that children get the best education possible. I've realized You know, as my travels internationally, globally, as well as domestically, a good, solid education is a wonderful foundation for all of us. Now, when somebody who asked the question there is, you know, should we fly our wings differently? Then there's a different way that you do that in life, Rob. It's when it comes to your passion or your purpose. That's when you can truly follow your heart. And it's the second part of the success code. You know, it starts with ownership. And the second part of the acronym, U, is unlock or unleash your purpose, your passion, your rocket fuel, effectively. And that's when I really, truly encourage clients that I work with individually, as well as sort of teams, that this is about what truly puts the fire in your tummy. And if education is sort of forcing you down a corporate sort of structured career route, you go to sixth form and then you go to university and then you go and study law and then you become a lawyer. And if that's the stuff that's making you think that's not me, well, it's at that point that you let your purpose and your passion take you in the right direction. But having a fundamental foundation of a solid education, a really good balanced education, is hugely important to me. I'm not a great role model for it, but in a way for that, you know, that's why I sort of give up some time personally and sort of on a charity side of things to make sure that I can do whatever I can to help as many children and as many young people get the best education that they can.
Great. We're going to rush through as many questions as we can. Stephen, why do you feel people who do badly or are given bad situations when young grow to be successful?
I think it comes back to some of the things that we've referenced so far, Rob, that they recognize we all have the ability that I'm talking about here. Every single one of us can harness and unlock the success code. Make no doubt about it. But there's something that I think about a lot and I talk about a lot, which seems to resonate, is something I call the Easiness Conundrum. And what I mean by the Easiness Conundrum is that the success I'm talking about is easy. You know, you can do and achieve whatever you want in life. It's easy. Now, how can somebody say that and actually stand by those comments? Well, I'll tell you why. Anything that you aspire to have in life, or personally or professionally, somebody somewhere else has done it before you. And there are clues everywhere. You go into Google and say, how do I start a business? You will have thousands of ideas how to do it. How do I lose weight? How do I grow my bank balance? How do I get promoted at work? How do I get the best educational qualifications? Whatever how you enter into Google, you will get all the clues you need. And here's why I say it's easy. You just follow the clues. However, the Easiness Conundrum, which is why this is a conundrum analogy, it's also very, very, very easy not to. So you can get all the clues in the world about how to start a successful business, but you'd rather spend 2 or 3 hours trawling nonsense on social media. You'd rather lie on the settee rather than going for a run and improving your health. You'd rather watch mindless TV rather than reading a book to make you sort of more intelligent about the area that you want to sort of start a business in. So that's the conundrum, Rob. I'm making it really simple. Success is easy. You just follow the clues. But unfortunately, 94% of us would rather do easier things not to do than actually the hard yards, which is which leads to success. So to answer the question that the person posed, anybody of any age, I absolutely believe, and I've seen it for my own eyes, can succeed and achieve. Just follow the clues. And when you get the temptations that take you away from following the clues, try your hardest to resist them. Try your hardest to remind yourself that you have a purpose and a passion. And it's that purpose and a passion that should drag you back to following the clues. But, you know, I've many times I've slipped away from the success code in my life, but I very, very quickly realized when I have, and when I get back on track, hey presto, things start to happen again.
With that one, Steve, so having said, coming from an immigrant family, knowing at a young age, my parents weren't able to give me anything beyond love, roof, food, very similar to you. That chip on the shoulder, for me, without question, was one of the key drivers and the motivations, like without figure of doubt. And I'm so clear of it today that I wouldn't change it for the world. I was very lucky I went to school in an inner city slum, which Camden was back in the days, and we got bullied and mugged and beaten up at a very, very young age. And I'm not comparing it to being around Toxteth, but I do understand what it is to have grown up in the 80s and gone to school in that period and faced the challenges of life. And for me personally, it was amazing. The challenge now in 2020, and I don't know if you're facing this or have, and I have a young child, is your kids are never going to go through what you went through, and without a shadow of a doubt are not going to grow up the way that I grew up, because they've got a different set of circumstances now. And because you have done so well, their starting point is a different planet to your starting point. One of my biggest concerns is, if I give my child or children, please God, in the future, a great platform or give them everything, they're not going to have that chip on the shoulder of having the suffering of growing up the way that I did to be the driver and the motivator. Is that something you've ever thought about, and maybe share with us some ideas on managing that?
Yeah, I recognise you almost paint my life picture almost to a T, Rob. That's the challenge that I have. That both children are very, very privileged. You know, they go to a fee-paying school. They have all the sort of gadgets and luxuries that young teenagers would want: phones and tablets and, you know, ensuite bathrooms and things like that. That, you know, were only distant dreams for me. So I do think a lot about that, Rob. About how can I. So I'm giving them a great platform because I'm privileged enough to be able to do that. And I tried very, very hard to make sure that both the children recognize that and appreciate that it's not a given, that, you know, there's been hard work to provide this. And some of the most important conversations I have with them as a parent are exactly what you're talking about there, that they have to find a fire. They have to find a reason, a compelling. You used the chip on the shoulder. That's what you and I both used. But actually, for our children today, we have to find a different thing to fire them up. But they still have their own brown envelope moments. You know, social media was never a problem for you and I as kids, as teenagers. But I see Molly and Daniel both, you know, if they get the wrong like on a post, if they sort of get mentioned critically by some of their friends about it, it's awful to them. You see the hurt and you see the pain and you think, my word, I need to protect them from that. So they have their own brown envelope moments, and I use them as the way I'll describe, in my own sort of fatherly way, the success code. I will say to them, okay, whose fault is it that this post is that? Well, I shouldn't have posted the picture. All right, good. So take ownership for what happened. All right, it's not my fault. It's not mum's fault. It's not your friend's fault. It was your fault. Do we agree? Yeah, it was my fault. Okay, so what are we going to do? And I take them through the code that way, Rob. So I'm trying very hard to apply the models, the strategies, and the insights that, you know, I would talk about corporately to an organization about how they would succeed. I'm trying to do that as a parent as well, to two children that are good kids. You know, they've got good morals, thanks mainly to their mum. But actually, I try and help them find that fire in their belly that you and I used, you know, at our points in life to push us on. And, it, you know, I'm starting to see signs. One of them's getting a real passion for sport. One of them showing a passion for sort of law and trying to help people, disadvantaged people through law. So I'm really stoking those fires, because I know if I can really fire them up in that context, then that'll be what pushes them onwards. That'll be the, you know, the chip on the shoulder moment that will give them the success that I sincerely hope comes in their lives. So that's how I'm trying to do it as a father, Rob.
I love it. I'll bear that in mind. Once I've read your code, I'll look to implement. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, it's been the most brilliant 40 minutes on your birthday, November the 20th. We will never forget that date. Last message for you. What do you want to leave with the listeners, our watchers, for the weekend ahead, to give them some happiness, positivity? What impact do you want to have in the world, and what positive message do you want to throw out there before we let everyone go for the weekend?
Oh, well, two really good questions there, Rob. My sort of purpose is very clear in life, and has been for probably 2 decades now, 20 odd years. I want to inform, inspire, and engage people, and let them realize they can unlock all of the success, all of the happiness, all of the fulfillment that they want in their lives. It's down to them. So my passion, which is what I do on everything I post, everything I speak about, every workshop, every client that I work with, my passion is to try and help them realize how to unlock that success that we're talking about through this call today. But the one thing I want to sort of leave everybody knowing, and it goes back to the very first point that we started talking about on this call, Rob, you will have brown envelope moments in your life. They may be happening today, they may happen next week, they may have happened last week, but they are going to happen to you. Challenging moments, personally or professionally, or typically often a bit of both. What I want everyone to realize at this particular point and listening from this call today is that you will get past it. And you can use that as the platform to achieve some incredible things on the back of it. But it only ever starts with you. So if you find yourself dragging others into blame, if you want to try and say that it was their fault, it's not my fault, it's his fault, it's their fault, it's the world's fault, it's COVID's fault, it's Boris Johnson's fault, it's President Trump's fault, please, please, please stop. Catch yourself on. And remember what Rob has helped us understand through this call today. You take ownership of that brown envelope moment, that challenging situation. Take ownership for it. And when you truly, truly take ownership for it, then everything is possible on the back of it. It really is. I know these are only words, and people, until you get into that moment, you have to find it. But you've heard from Rob his examples. Hopefully you've heard a couple from me, but from 750, 760 other people that I've interviewed over 8 or 9 years, when I've asked them how have they gone on to succeed, it's how they reacted in those tough moments, those brown envelope moments in their lives. It's how they reacted that was the catalyst for everything that followed.
Amazing. Wow. I mean, really, truly inspirational, Steve. Absolutely love it. Promise me, Steve, I think hopefully Dan will get in contact with you. Promise me that we can catch up properly and have a call. I'd love to just hear,
Rob. Yeah, it's been great chatting to you.
Hear more. I just resonate so much with your story, and it's just a true inspiration. Have the most amazing birthday with your family in lockdown. Thank you for sharing your truly motivational and inspirational story. Thank you everyone for listening. We will be back same place, same time next week. Hashtag AskRobCo. Follow us on all the platforms. Be safe, be well, and have a great weekend ahead. Thank you so much, Steve. You're amazing.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.